Thank you. Good evening. Welcome to the March 15th meeting of the Policy Committee, School District of Waukesha. I call the meeting order. Let me get right to the verification of the meeting. Is it properly posted?
Yes, it has.
It has been properly posted. Thank you. And I'm going to move into the section where we have opportunity for citizens to speak. We have two? Okay, thank you. We have more than 6 speakers, so we will, even though we talk about a 2 to 3 limit, we will give you the opportunity to expand that if necessary. Having less than 6 speakers, up to 5 minutes. We'll expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using inappropriate language in any manner, and be respectful in their comments. Excuse me. Speakers are here to address the board and not to address an audience. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future meetings. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker. We don't have a big audience tonight in the board, and refrain from responding with verbal comments during applause or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience, and that the area behind the speaker and the podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers, for all of us, silence your cell phone. Our first, speaker will be Paul Reese. Paul?
Good evening. It's just like old times here tonight. Number of students failing one class or more in 2019 at Waukesha North was 54. And in 2020, that number rose to 292, an increase of 440.7%. In 2019, Waukesha South had a total of 135 kids failing at least one class or more. And in 2020, that number rose to 387. For an increase of 186.7%. In 2019, Waukesha West had a total of 74 students failing at least one class or more. And in 2020, again, that number rose to 268 for an increase of 262.2%. These are numbers, but they're not really numbers. They're students' lives that were put on hold. This is what happens when 5 board members decide it's better to bend over for the teachers union than to stand up for the students in this district. These are lives that were put on hold because of your decisions. Hopefully, the remaining 2, 3 have been removed. The remaining 2, Greg Dietz and Bill Baumgart, will be removed in a few weeks for doing this. But it's even worse than that, Bill. You were really disappointing last week when you decided to vote no on closing down a school. You've been on this board for how long? 20-some years. How many times have you voted no before on closing a school? Not because it was mean, not because you hated any of those students or any of those families. You did it because it was the right thing to do. Because that's what helps education move forward in this district. That's what saves money and puts money into the classroom, and you know it. But rather than adding comfort to the families in this community, you added angst. And that angst gets reflected onto those kids. And it makes it more difficult and more worrisome when they have to start a new school. And that was your choice. You chose to do that. You didn't have to go along with the other 2 idiots you're running with. You chose to do that. You know better. You've been here longer. You should not have been so foolish to do such a thing to those kids. You did it for political purpose to give other 2 cover for their irrational decision. Even during the listening session, you said this was a good call. You went against your own better judgment for political purposes. Bill, I mean, of all the things you've done, me and you have disagreed a lot over the years, but this was a pretty rotten thing to do because that angst is going to be applied to those kids. They're the ones that are going to feel it.
And second, Kurt O'Brien.
Yeah, I have no desire to speak at board meetings, to be honest with you guys.
But you have a policy called public comment at board meetings, which was revised as recently as September 2021. It was revised in a way to engage the board more fully in any sort of disciplinary actions against speakers, rather than letting the board president do it kind of unilaterally. Whether one agrees with that policy or disagrees with the policy, it's the policy the board adopted in September 21. And when you have an issue with a speaker speaking, the first order of action is a letter of notice that goes from the board president. It doesn't need to have the board actually do that. It's just a warning saying, look, we believe your behavior, I believe your behavior as board president was out of line, and you should refrain, or otherwise there might be consequences going forward, which then requires the full board now to get involved in some way, manner, shape, or form. That's the policy. It's up for discussion tonight. You might change that policy. And if you change that policy, revise it in some way going forward, it affects people going forward, right? After you change the policy, which comes when it comes before the full board at the next board meeting. My question tonight is, why haven't you followed this policy? I'm under the understanding that the administration and the board president took action against a community member that wasn't a warning, it was an action. And if the board wants to be engaged in this type of stuff per the policy, they should follow the policy, as should the administration. So it troubles me that we're not following the policy that was just revised September 21. It troubles me that, to me it seems like a simple task to at least issue a letter saying, hey, this is not acceptable, stop it. And then after that, let the board take the action they should. I don't believe that you should ever treat board members disrespectfully. I don't like calling any board member out by name. I also don't like telling board members how they should vote. I think board members have been elected to make that decision themselves. I can give them input, but I'm not going to tell them how to vote. There isn't any easy votes in the tough decisions. They're not easy votes. And for me to say that you made a wrong vote at a given time and stand up here and kind of act like I know better than you when you have more information or should have more information than I do, to me that's just wrong. How I approach, hopefully as best I can, my dealings with people, and especially with board members.
2 minutes.
Thank you. Especially with board members, is to treat them with respect, because they deserve that respect. They don't deserve me standing at a podium telling them how bad they are. And I would hope that anybody who speaks at the board meeting does that. I've seen so much disrespectful behavior, and my grandmother taught me that you treat everybody with respect, you treat everybody with love. You don't treat people with anger. None of you deserve that. I don't care what any past problems we've had between us, none of you deserve to be treated angrily. Thank you, Mr. President.
And that does conclude our public opportunities to address us. Takes us to the first action item, which is approval of the minutes from our, actually 2 months ago meeting. Is there a motion on the minutes? January.
So moved.
Okay. Seconded by Kelly. Any questions, changes to the minutes? Anybody needs? Seeing none, I'll ask for, all those in favor of accepting the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 4-0, Julie. And that's a whole bunch of pages out of the way here. Okay. Now, we do have quite a variety of policies under discussion this evening. The first, I think it's 8, deal with action. They will be the kind that are Joe, I think I'm getting this right, a one read and then we're going to go to the board meeting?
Correct. These are revisions to the policies.
Except for one exception, which has already been read once, and that is the
Public comment.
The conduct in a virtual classroom.
Correct. I apologize, Mr.
Okay, so let's go through these. Policy number two, oops, just a minute. Got to get the right page first. Definitions. Policy 0100. We have added a definition for administrator and just tuned up a couple other ones. Joel, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we provide a more clear definition of administrator in here. An employee who holds a position of leadership over a defined function or department of the district who reports directly to the superintendent. In policy and administrative guidelines, capitalization of the term administrators may apply delegation of responsibilities as appropriate to staff members. So in policy, you'll see an administrator will do similarly with superintendent, the superintendent shall or the superintendent may. Superintendent, it's capital form, and you can see that later in this bylaw under definitions. Could mean any designee. Similarly, we want to make sure that that's clear under administrator. They could have a teacher leader who's responsible for something, a dean of students who's responsible for something, but ultimately it's their delegation that gives them that authority. The other update here is we have under board, you can see the addition of the Board of Education, also commonly referred to as the school board, shall take action that is within the comprehensive meaning of the term duties and powers, provided that such action is not prohibited by the state or federal law. So that's clarified in definitions. District is also clarified in the definitions. It's the territorial unit for school administration. Districts are classified as common, union, high, union, and first-class city schools. Joint school district is one with a territory which is not wholly in one municipality. You can see principal is updated in this, and then school official is also updated. The reason why there's several of these, as we've talked about at other committee meetings, through the pandemic, when we did cancel some meetings, there were definitions that were put out there, and in this current revision, the definition of administrator was added. And when we went through the editing process, we found that there were a couple of other recommended changes along the way. So that's why you see more than just administrator clarified tonight.
Okay, thank you. On 0100 definitions, are there any questions to address? That's what it is. It's just a page of definitions, so. Seeing none, I'll be seeking a motion for approval of adjustments on policy 100, definitions.
So moved.
Thank you. Seconded by Greg. Julie, you got that? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Thank you. That was number 1. Policy 0142.1, the electoral process. And Joe, this has got a little bit more of a paragraph on it.
Yep, the statute was updated 120.066B3M. It was updated at the state level. So we need to include the statement in our policy. In addition, if an incumbent files written notification that the incumbent is not a candidate for re-election to their office or fails to file a declaration of candidacy within the time prescribed by this paragraph, the district clerk shall promptly provide public notice of the fact on the district's website. If the district does not maintain a website, by posting notices in at least 3 different locations within the district. So what this says, not to use you, Dr. Piasek, as the example, but if Dr. Piasek does not wish to run again, we would have to make that public, and then that would be posted on the website. So.
And
it was okay using it.
we've had issues, not issues, that's a strong word. We've had that situation happen in the past where somebody doesn't want to return, and if I'm not mistaken, it just dawned on me, there's a timeline by which they have to get that out before the we got to look.
Yeah, it's in the second one. If an incumbent files a declaration.
Oh, it's up there, yeah.
No later than 5 p.m. on
There
the
it is.
second Friday preceding the Tuesday
Yeah.
deadline. There's no extension.
That's right, it's there. We just got to find it. Okay, So we've followed this, and we've also used the process in the past. Questions on this one?
Maybe just one clarification. I might suggest where it says within the time prescribed by this paragraph, we should probably say within the time prescribed by the above paragraph.
That's a good catch.
Otherwise, I have no issues.
The first Tuesday in January, kind of falls the nomination period by the,
I have no issues with the terms in the paragraph, it's just changing the word "the" to the above.
oh, yes. So friendly modification?
If I could, yeah,
Okay.
otherwise I think it's just a technical correction.
Okay. Julie, you got that? Thank you. If there's no other questions on the policy 0142.1, I'd accept the motion for that. Motion for approval?
So moved.
Kelly, approved by, seconded by Anthony. Further questions? Seeing none, I will seek aye for those in favor. Please say aye. Aye, opposed? 4-0, Julie. And right behind that is approval of the policy 0142.5, vacancies.
Yeah, this policy was updated to address just some unique situations that have happened in and around school systems around Wisconsin and the country. It just clarifies, appointment of the board to fill a vacancy shall be made by the members of the remaining board consistent with the bylaw 162 quorum and bylaw 167.1 voting. When we met with our consultant to discuss this, there were a number of school districts whose active membership fell below what was a traditional quorum of the board. So for instance, the 7-member board went down to 3 members, and how do you go about proceeding with 3 members? How do you fill those positions? So this is aimed at trying to address situations like that, and then just provide clarity if you don't have enough people who, are available and at a meeting to fill the seats, so.
Okay, questions on this one? I don't know that, I can't remember that we have done these along the way. Any questions? Seeking someone to approve that.
I'll move to approve.
Kelly's approving it, 0142, seconded by Greg Dietz. Any questions, further questions, discussion? All in favor of accepting 0142.5 on vacancies, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. And now we have the process by which board officers are selected by a majority vote of those members present. Joel?
Similarly with the last policy, for those situations where the board would drop down below a quorum or not have its traditional, in our case, like 9 members, 7 members, whatever it is, this then would clarify how you'd go about getting your officers to run your board.
This is the existing officers, I mean, the positions that we have for, yes, okay. As opposed to getting on the board, this is the one, you're on the board, we're going to identify the officers.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Questions on 0152? Seeing none, I will seek a motion for approval. Greg is moving for approval of 0152. Is there a second? Anthony seconds it. Further questions? All those in favor of accepting 0152, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? 4-0. Julie? Okay. Policy 0165.1, noticing meetings.
Yeah, this is just aimed to clarify, first off, what they're saying is notice of any board meeting instead of regular board meetings. And regular board meetings traditionally being defined as that one time per month that our board would get together for its formal meeting. So this is just to cover any of our meetings, both formal board meetings and then, not policy committee, committees in general. It talks about where those notices should be. It should be made in one, not all, but at least one of the following ways. So the notice is posted in at least 3 public places likely to give notice to the person affected. The posting of the notice in at least one place publicly affected, notice to persons affected, and on the governmental body's website or by paid publication in a news medium likely to give notice to persons affected. Generally speaking, Sue Ettinger posts our board meetings 2 ways, publicly in all of our school buildings and on our district website. So those are the 2 means that she has traditionally used for publication of the meeting.
So this is not different.
This isn't different. The really is, it's just talking about making sure that we're complying with open meetings that cover both the regular board and then the board and non-board committees.
Okay. Questions on this one? Seeing none, I will seek a motion for approval of policy 0165.1.
So moved.
Moved by Kelly, seconded by Greg. Further questions?
Who's the person in the building that's directed to post this?
Sue emails that to all administrators and all office assistants.
Okay.
So
They
2 people have it. If
post themselves.
if the assistant is ill, the administrator will post it. If the administrator is ill and it's generally their responsibility, the assistant will post it. But it does get posted.
They send that out a couple days ahead of time. I would assume.
Yes.
Yep, they send it at the same time that usually Sue sends those out on Fridays for the upcoming week.
Okay.
And then within, or outside of the 24-hour window for any other meeting. So for instance, on Monday, we have to schedule something for a Thursday, she would send it out on that Monday.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And we've been honest to that. Okay, at this point, I'll seek for for approving this. We've got a motion, right? Okay, all in favor of accepting 0165.1, please say aye.
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 Opposed? 4-0. Julie? Policy 5200, attendance.
Yeah, this policy is in front of us. If you go to the 3rd page of the policy, under Election Day Official, students are able to serve as Election Day officials. And what this adds in here is students in private schools or students enrolled in home-based private education. We do have students who come to us, for instance, from homeschool for a period or 2 a day at the high school level. We would want to note that it was an excused absence for those students because it does kind of sit as a unique thing. This was a question that Neola had and other school districts had wrestled with, particularly in the fall when elections come around.
So, we have, I don't know if we've had a recent, anybody doing that, but in the past, I think we have had.
We have had some students who have wanted to be Election Day officials, and we just want to make sure that if anybody's here from a homeschool or a private school, that
If they get a
they'd have
chance.
access to that too without penalty for their attendance.
Excellent, thank you. Other questions on 5200? I'm seeking a motion for approval of policy 5200, attendance.
So moved.
Second, moved by Kelly, Beth, tongue-tied.
Sure.
And Anthony seconds it. Any additional questions? Seeing none, all in favor of accepting number 5200 attendance, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0, Julie. Okay, here's 7450 property inventory, and
This one is simply updated, add item H on the 2nd page, that proper sales procedures shall be established to ensure the highest possible return in the event the district is authorized or required to sell equipment or property.
any questions for Joe on this one? Seeing none, anybody wishes to move for accepting 7450 property inventory? Any motions? Anthony's moving approval, seconded by Kelly. Any further questions?
Dr. Cook, do we have, Dr. Siebert, is the Blair site listed anywhere as being for sale? Do we know?
I don't believe it's on the market right now.
Okay.
I think Mr. Clark said that we occasionally get a, hey, I'm interested, can you show me the building? But that's about as far as it's gone on.
Okay. Okay. But if anyone listening was interested, they could kind of,
Reach out to Mr. Clark.
Quickly.
okay, thank you.
Okay, policy 7450, property inventory. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 4-0. Which brings me to policy 5500.01, conduct in a virtual classroom. This is the one that is not just a one-time. We've already had one reading on this, and because this was a new policy, Joe?
Correct, yeah, this was in front of the committee a month ago, and then, 2 months ago, and then it was in front of the board in February, all as part of a first reading. So it's back in front of you for our final committee approval, and then it will go to the board next month for approval, should the committee approve it.
Yes, Kelly, go ahead.
Were you going to say something, Bill?
I think the same thing you were about to say.
Well, I was just going to ask one thing. When we discussed this last time, we talked about item I, which said use of computing device to screenshot images of the virtual classroom unless, and we had talked about unless potentially authorized by the teacher if they're working in groups or there might be a reason to take a screenshot. I would note that item G potentially covers it because it says cell phones unless authorized by the teacher as part of the class activity, including use of cell or other recording device to record or photograph the class, but not completely. So I'm just curious how the committee feels about adding to item I, or how administration feels about that, the words unless authorized by the teacher.
I did talk to Mr. Smith about this, principal, and he, screenshots of presentation materials, for instance, the teacher's slide deck or, something that's up there instructionally, but they were a bit leery about having a screenshot of the class or classmates. That was something that Mr. Smith didn't think would come up within the course of instruction,
Okay.
where the kids' images were captured kind of in that.
So this is
Pretty much.
specifically about people.
This is about the people, the virtual classmates, yes.
Okay.
Not the instructional materials that would be associated with the class.
Would it be okay then to maybe strike the word class
Yes.
so that is that still clear? I understand what you're saying with that.
You okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, and this came up, because, in the last year and a half because we started using virtual classrooms and we wanted to be sure that we had appropriate behavior in those classrooms as well as all the other classrooms.
Mr. Smith was very grateful that a policy like this did come forward because EAchieve for 15 years has been dealing with, one degree or another of some of this behavior, and this does help solidify how they would handle it.
Okay, I will be looking for a nomination for approval of 5500.01, conduct in a virtual classroom.
So moved.
Moved by Greg, seconded by Anthony. Thank you. Any further questions on this policy? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, sorry, forgot the opposed part. 4-0. Julie? That was all of the action item policies that we had in front of us. We do have discussion and possible action relative to 0167.3, public comment at board meetings. So,
about 6 months ago, the committee made some revisions to the public comment at board meetings policy. So we've implemented that going September, October, up to the present. And we, through the request of several board members, wanted to take a look at this policy to see if the changes still met our needs and if there was any adjustment that we needed to make to the policy for our future operations as at a school board meeting or a committee meeting level.
Okay. I know, Kelly, you have presented us with some information you'd like to share?
If I could, thank you. Seeing this on the agenda, thought I would make some suggestions that might help clarify the procedures related to how we do this. And I was a significant advocate for some of the changes that are here. The intent when we made these changes was essentially not to try to limit what people can say, and really also not to unilaterally give an individual the authority to remove someone. But I think from a procedural perspective, there were a couple things that were of note that I thought potentially could be corrected with a few changes. One of those is related to, well, let me just kind of run through. There are no changes until the second page. Item G was just simply a change from participants to speakers, because I think it doesn't really pertain to participants, which may have just been an oversight in the last revision. And then item 5, there was the authority to the presiding officer to where it said will notify said speaker. I modified it to where it says the presiding officer may notify speakers who violate the above mentioned criteria. I removed by letter because I think in the digital age we may want to keep options open for how that notification occurs. That future, inappropriate, et cetera. And so nothing else has changed. It simply says notify the speakers that future, et cetera. Stop on that one.
Interrupt for a minute. Okay, notify speakers who violate the above-mentioned criteria. You've deleted the board president entirely, right?
It would apply to the presiding officer.
Oh,
Notify.
you're going to add that in?
No, it's actually under item I. It says the.
Oh, it's right up on top.
May.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Got it.
So in the instance of a committee meeting, if, someone's swearing or something, they would give the committee chair the opportunity to
Sure.
reach out and say, this is maybe something you might want to consider. And I think that's more appropriate too, especially if it's happening within a committee. And then what used to be item 6, I kept as item 6. It's now item 7. I made a minor modification to that and added a proposed item 6, and this is something that would be open for discussion. One of the things that I think we've realized over the course of the last few months is that I think the support remains to continue to bring the board together for lengthy suspensions if needed, but this would allow the presiding officer the opportunity to ask an individual to not come and speak until basically up to 30 days or until the board's had an opportunity to make a decision. I put in brackets, so it says suspend an individual from speaking as a result of egregious repeated disruptive behavior, offensive language for up to 30 days, up to, not for, total of. And then in the brackets, it's up for discussion with the approval of the board president. Again, my intent in some of the original changes we made here was so that individuals didn't really have unilateral discretion over removing people, because I think that really just presents problems. But I did not intend to create burden to the extent that we can't deal with things that need to be dealt with. So that was my motivation there. And then I just made a simple modification to what was the original provision that says for longer than 30 days. So that what used to be there would be if
Brought down
it was
to-
longer than 30 days.
We all just got this, so let's take a minute to. Any discussions with the suggested, it's not replacements, it's just beefing it up a little bit, making it clear.
It just refines it a bit. It doesn't really change the
Yeah.
intent. It just gives us some, I would say, more responsiveness that currently we don't have. And I think it's still fair because it can be consistently applied.
Anybody have any, Tim, do you have anything? Because you get involved in some of this. Are you okay, or?
Oh, one thing you didn't talk about, Dr. Piasek, is the last part you put in about meeting attendees,
Yes.
which I also think is important.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, which part?
Yeah, there's another section I can cover.
Oh, right here.
Also, so in looking back at this, I think there was a little bit of confusion or inconsistency around, are we talking about the person who's speaking at the podium, or are we talking about anybody who's speaking in a meeting, whether they have the floor or not? So I added this provision, meeting attendees, whether or not registered speakers must abide by meeting rules set forth by the presiding officer, which are read at the beginning of every meeting, and must refrain from disruptive, distracting, or disorderly conduct, or speaking to board members while the meeting is in session. Meeting attendees who engage in such behavior will subject to the same consequences as speakers, and may be warned of potential sanctions or suspended from participation in future board meetings.
Okay.
I mean, we've periodically had someone in the back of the room who's shouting out for a point of order, which they really have no authority to do, but I think those are just, some of those things are nuisances, but if it becomes a pattern, and we're pretty consistent with the language that we're talking about, just really disruptive activity here, not just common.
This was posted as a discussion or possible action item, so I would, Joe, do you have anything that says you don't want to go one way or the other?
No, I mean, I think that it certainly would be appropriate, just given the fact that,
Yes.
what's been presented tonight, if the committee wanted to approve it, there would be nothing out of order about doing that.
That's why we posted it that way.
Yeah, so we want to give you the flexibility of doing
And
that.
this would be the first,
Because it's a revision to policy, it could go from the committee meeting tonight, if approved, to the
Right,
board in
right.
April? Oh, April.
yes, we can.
Yeah, so it would go reading tonight, reading in April, and possible approval if the board agrees with it.
Okay, so there is evidence that this has been accepted, but I would be seeking a motion for the modifications to 0167.3. Kelly, do you want to make the
Make a
motion?
motion, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
There's participants in here a few times. If we're changing speaker point G. Did you turn your mic on?
Oh.
Let me start over. If we're changing the word participants to speakers or speaker, that's in a couple other points. Do we need to make that clarification?
Can you point out where they are, Anthony?
D
On front page.
and F is the two I see.
Yeah.
I would support D. I think F may be more broadly applied. I understand that the idea that a speaker can't speak more than once, but if a speaker has spoken and becomes a participant, we're asking them not to speak again.
So this D would be a change, one you would change? Or am I misunderstanding?
I would propose to change D. Do you know what I'm saying, Anthony?
Yes.
To speakers.
D to speakers. Under F, would that make more sense if it was attendees? Or do we want participants?
Well, we are saying speak. Participant may speak, so it's still the speaker, but
Right.
at least that's the way I'm reading it.
I'm okay with the change to attendee.
I'm sorry, say louder?
I think attendee and participant maybe are interchangeable.
So participant? Attendees are sitting in the room.
I know,
How do we,
they're not exactly interchangeable, yeah.
yeah, I would stick with
Let me
participant.
just leave it.
Yeah.
Just for the, just to reduce the number of unnecessary modifications if, yeah, we're okay with it. So just D. Just D.
Just D is changing.
I shouldn't be saying that. I want to leave that to
To speak.
Mr. Zenobia.
Well, that would make sense. If D is, instead of participants, is speakers, and F would be fine to leave as is.
Because they are speaking, and why do I say speaker speaking? Okay, we have a motion. I did not catch a second.
I had another question,
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead, you can do that.
Slow on the take here. So, under the presiding officer, letter I, so once we're in the meeting, the presiding officer can do all the things listed here. Does this then take the authority away from the board president and give it to the presiding officer to then suspend individuals in the future? Is that what that's saying?
Mhm.
Just talking in the moment.
That's in the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, so, right. It gives that authority on item 6
Mhm.
for that 30-day period, but on item 7, well, we actually do need to make a clarification. On item 6, I had in brackets, with the approval of the board president, and that's something we probably need to decide if we agree on or not, because we could strike what's in the bracket and give the presiding officer, I'm going to take my motion back, please, if I could.
Sure.
Okay. So my intent there was to say, well, we could talk about that. Do we want to let the committee chair just say, this is my decision? Or would that be better if that's in consultation with the board president? Keeping in mind that the board president may not be in attendance at that meeting, but at least would understand the circumstances and then 7 returns that back to, they're making a recommendation to suspend longer than 30 days, and that's something that would be made to the board, to the full board.
I guess my only point in all that is to say, the presiding officer of any committee, I think would need the approval of the board president to make any type of, suspension after the fact, after the meeting is over. Correct, that's what we're looking at, where it says for longer than 30 days. So the
Longer than 30
speaker-
days would be the whole board.
The whole board.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that would require the approval of the board president, correct?
Up to 30?
Yes.
Only if we keep what's in the brackets.
Okay.
And I'm putting that out there as an option, you know.
Number 6 without the graph, I mean, that, at that point, the presiding officer can take action, is the way you've said it, if that bracket isn't there, right? So the presiding officer in a committee meeting could take action for 30 days,
Up to, yeah.
up to 30 days, yeah.
Keep in mind that in item 5, we have that recommendation for communication or warning. So that would be the preferred route, is that someone's notified that, something's escalating. But we do say, provided that the behavior does not constitute a safety concern. So if there's an incident in the moment, that would give that authority to the presiding officer without consulting with the president.
I think 5 is good, but I think 6 has to exist in one way or another because 5 is kind of setting it up, but I don't think it's taking action. At least that's the way I'm interpreting it.
Mhm.
But 6 is one, as Anthony says, that presents the action.
Well, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say, with the approval of the board president, I think is necessary if a committee person is taking action in a 5-person or a 3-person committee, and then there's going to be something greater than stopping it in the moment, there's going to be, potentially be a suspension or something else, the board president represents 9 as opposed to a 3 or 5-person committee. That's,
I personally agree. I don't think that we should be running to suspend people. I think it should be somewhat
yeah,
difficult
Yeah,
and rare.
yep,
So,
I agree.
which leaves the brackets in place.
I think so.
Okay, so the motion that you removed, which,
well, I don't think we had,
oh, that's fine.
so
Would you like to put it back on?
you might still have some questions.
I'm good, thank you.
And that 30 days, Dr. Piasek, really gets us to like the next board meeting.
Well, that's a really good point, because I thought about that. I didn't really know how to word it. It doesn't necessarily get us to the next board meeting, because if, and we might want to consider that. So I didn't really want to make it too
It
cumbersome
might miss
to
it by a day,
say.
is what you're saying?
What's that?
It might miss it by a day?
Might miss it by a day. So if
Right.
we wanted to say,
Right.
until, but let's say that board doesn't meet, or something happens and that meeting doesn't happen. So, my intent was that, maybe you could get to the next full board meeting.
Right.
But the 30 days, to be honest, doesn't get there. I looked at the calendar, like maybe 40 does, but 40 days just seemed a little bit,
Well, And odds are that the presiding officer would have contacted the board president within that 30 days, so they could take action then if they need to, or decide it's going to end. No?
Well, I want to make sure that, the way I am seeing this is that no communication of suspension would happen then without the presiding officer and the president deciding that together. So it's not going to happen like in this moment. It's going to happen
Right.
next day or a couple days later.
Sure.
That communication will be made, and then it would be 30 days until, let's say, and maybe we should clarify 30 days from, the incident, or, again, the intent is not to stretch it out, and it's also
Right.
not to make the policy over cumbersome, but,
So could it say the next full board meeting,
Or just until the next,
until the next?
a majority of the board.
until-
language
for
is
30
there.
For up to 30 days.
In the next sentence, we have approval by majority of the board.
Yeah, where is that again? Oh, it's in the 7.
We're in 7, so can we say until? This can be considered by the majority of the board?
And that's for additional,
Right, so that would be for longer.
longer term, right? In the meantime, before the next full board meeting, it would be the chairperson and the board president deciding.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my assumption is that we normally have a couple of committee meetings between board meetings, and
Right.
so it might not be that difficult to get a few other members in place and
Right.
have a special meeting.
The nice thing about the full board meeting would be that, we're all together anyway. And it wouldn't even require that. And we'd all be here probably, because it'd be down on our calendars.
Jim?
I would think it might be possible that a committee chair, for example, could use number 6, but then it doesn't go to number 7 also. So I think we just want to be careful. You might not have a need
Correct.
at some points to go beyond the 30 days. So I wouldn't want to tie things from 6 into 7
Okay,
necessarily,
okay.
but allow them to work together if they need to.
Right,
That's a good point.
because it's not required that we extend it.
No.
No.
Okay. Put your motion back in?
One possible modification to this would be just to change it to 35 days, because that would cover the calendar time. It's just an odd number, and I didn't want anybody to think too much of it, but that 35 days would give us,
In number 6.
yeah.
As long as you haven't made the motion, you can say that right now and still make the motion.
3.5 days.
So Dr. Piasek just in 6, not in 7.
Well, that's a different thing.
It would have,
It would be both, I think.
to be,
Well, the longer the 30 days, you can,
it would have to be
necessary, you can
both,
extend it
yeah.
longer.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yep, okay.
Approval? Excuse me, motion?
Yeah, I'm just going to make one more tweak. Just let's make it say 35 calendar days, just so there's no,
35 calendar days.
Right, so, yeah.
all right. So moved.
So moved. Seconded by Greg?
Yep.
Good discussion, that's okay. Anything else? All in favor of the, what's the number on that one? Policy 0167.3, public comment at board meetings as adjusted, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? 4-0, Julie.
So that would be an action item,
That-
Mr. Baumgart, next
That is ready to go back to the committee meeting, actually, to the board meeting.
full board, yep.
Is it not, it's consent agenda? Or would it be an action?
Yeah, it would be on the consent agenda.
Consent, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
you're right,
revision.
you're right, yep.
Yeah, well, that's where they're all presented, and if somebody wants to talk about one, we can talk about it.
Sure.
Okay, at this point, we have about 16 policies that we're going to talk about, many of which are technical corrections only. Okay, we agreed in advance that we would move, what's the number?
Item 16.
5460, up, Rachel is going to join us. 5460, graduation requirements.
So if I may, Mr. Baumgart, just so the committee knows, going forward, we have committed to getting you your policy packets a week to 2 weeks ahead of the meeting so that you have ample time to go through things. As a result of that, Julie, when she goes into board docs, she does an ordering that goes from the policies to the agenda. And if we have additions along the way, those will just get added to the end. So we may run into some circumstances where I make a request to move things from the bottom up to the top because we have an administrator, a teacher, or somebody who's going to be here with us that night as a guest. So just to foreshadow what could happen in the future. The other thing that I'd like to lay out there just is we're not trying to get the cart out in front of the horse because this is one of those topics that is going across committees. But just from a timing standpoint of when this committee meets, when teaching and learning meets, when the board meets, and when we start getting into approval, we wanted to introduce this topic to you tonight so you have some background knowledge.
Okay.
So, we do have, this discussion tonight is going to kind of be like along two paths. The first is aligned to the social studies, world history, economics, personal finance discussion that is happening at the Teaching and Learning Committee in and around the curricular revision, implementation, material selection. The second discussion tonight is just more a broad overview, and just want to give the committee some perspective just on our total number of graduation requirements that we have in the district, and then how that compares to some of our neighboring districts, how it compares to districts that are of similar size across the state, and then enter into a discussion around what's a good number that allows for both us meeting what are those state level requirements, what allows us to address some things that, you know, we value as a community, but then what allows students at the high school level to pursue that individual pathway that we talk about, that career pathway or whatever it might be. The more credits that we require, the fewer choices that kids in the end eventually have. So we want to talk about the required classes, the total number of possible credits earned, and then just give you some perspective as to what other school districts do so that we can enhance this discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Herman to talk a little bit about the world history, personal finance, and econ, and then we can get into the overall number of credits.
Well, thanks for having me. I have to say this just feels different than the teaching and learning meetings that I'm usually a part of. So appreciate being here tonight and appreciate that it's not yet 9 o'clock and I'm at the table. So again, that also feels good. Joe did tell me that I'm not supposed to share my presentation, that we don't do presentations at policy meetings, but I do have one for you in typical Rachel Herman format. So I'll reference that as necessary if you need examples as I go through some of this discussion. So I wanted to first address, I know that this topic came up at the full board meeting and that there were some additional questions posed. And so I wanted to specifically just address some of those questions. But first, again, wanting just to make clear what we are putting forth as a recommendation, which is that we would turn world history, which is currently a semester-long required course, into a full year required course. We would take economics, which is currently a required semester-long course, and we would keep that on our books, but that would become an elective offering, and we would instead require personal finance as our required elective for students to take. So required elective, I know that sounds like kind of an oxymoron, but that's what we would be requiring. So that is our current recommendation. And so just a few pieces at the Teaching and Learning Board meeting. Again, we went over all of our rationale behind that recommendation. We talked at length about our student achievement data around literacy. I know there was a question, Mr. Zenobia, that you had posed around, are there other areas that we can tackle the literacy piece? And so I just wanted to just bring it to everybody's attention that we are currently undergoing a high school ELA curricular revision as well. We have not been in front of you as a board since early fall because they have been deeply embedded in the work around phase 1. They're actually coming back to you in April to give you an update on Appendix A in our curricular revision process to share with you kind of the data that they've found, the theory, the work that they've been doing. And they have been piloting some curricular resources to tackle the work in ELA as well. So there is work happening specific to our English classrooms as well, where we know, again, a lot of high-quality literacy instruction needs to take place. In addition, we talked a little bit about the rationale around our economics strands being integrated within all of those core areas, human geography, world history, and U.S. history. And so I know one of the questions was around, can we see exactly kind of how that happens? So I did bring some handouts for anybody that wants. I've got our AP curriculum, which, again, we don't write AP curriculum. AP College Board puts out that curriculum. And so I've brought that for anybody to look through. I did not print out, but I have access for all of you to see. AP for each of its courses has about a 60 to, depending on the course, 80-page course guide. You saw it when you approved the human geography textbook. I thought because there was 3 courses and there are 5 of you, I would save some paper and just give you the links of where you can go to access that. But that's like the most in-depth way to see exactly how the economic strands are integrated within the courses. And again, we don't write that curriculum, that's AP. What I've done for you is just printed out the at-a-glance AP curricular guides, which gives you kind of just the rundown of the scope and sequence. And again, I'll give you the access so that anybody you can log on and see it. But I did not print for you the 180-page packets. So again, that was our second, rationale around that. And then our rationale around this idea of, again, helping our students who we know are striving to see themselves in the curriculum in which we teach, teaching that global perspective. We live in a global society, and that's a course that really hones in on that issue. And then lastly, state statute mandates 2 things that we teach in terms of our social studies areas. They mandate government, which is currently a required semester course, and they mandate personal finance standards. And so again, when we looked at where do those standards best align themselves, as a department, we feel that they best align themselves to the personal finance class. And that with that, we are given access to a state grant. If we keep those standards in economics and maintain a requirement of economics and keep those standards in economics, we do not get that grant. So those grant dollars are lost if we do not take those standards and put them in personal finance. So that is still the recommendation. We are willing to explore. We've had some conversations, some alternatives. We know that I met with our social studies teachers today. They would be ecstatic for a 4-credit requirement of social studies and require economics and a full year of world history. We've had some requests from some of our parent stakeholders. I've gotten several emails of, can you require personal finance and economics and make world history a year-long class. I have not gotten many of those requests, but I've heard it. And so that brings up to Joe's point, when we start to talk about that level of requirement, we're now talking about potential elimination of some choices for students. We're talking about a fiscal dollar amount that goes into staffing for both of those required areas, both economics and personal finance. We're talking about curricular rewrites for both areas and not just one. So there's a little bit more that goes into that when you're talking about that additional, all of it being required versus what we currently have as a recommendation. But that's what we're here to discuss. So we can start there. And then Joe didn't reference it, and it maybe isn't need to be discussed, but there are some additional changes, one in physical education that you probably noted, and again, I don't want to totally squirrel. We have not offered physical education 10 in this district for quite some time. It's not a course, so that was taken out. That was replaced by team sports quite some time ago, and students in their Phi-Ed, we've not changed the graduation requirements, they just pick from a variety of different electives. So I just wanted to point that out, that is an additional change. And then integrated math 2 is replacing geometry and honors geometry going into the following school year. And you all approved, our teaching and learning committee approved the integrated math 2 work, the syllabus and the UBD back in the fall. So I just wanted to make note of those 2 additional changes that don't really have anything to do with this, but that are updates to the policy.
Okay. Rachel, some questions? Kelly?
One just clarifying on the policy, there was one other sentence that was struck that I was curious about, where it says a student must have participated in curriculum relating to financial literacy in order to earn a diploma. Is that related to the state standards that you referenced, the mandate? Or I assumed that was personal financial planning.
Correct, and that was replaced with the G, 1 semester of personal finance is required for graduation.
So it was already there. Is it already required and we haven't been?
Nope, so because a student, right now, the way that we meet that standard is by infusing financial literacy into, that's the personal finance, into economics. We do not require students to take personal finance.
But that's the change.
Correct.
We already have economics listed as a requirement right now.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we need that? Why does that sentence accomplish? I don't understand. It seems like it's different.
So right now, we take so the state mandates that you teach personal finance, and that's financial literacy is how it was worded in the way the policy had been written.
Okay.
Okay? So personal finance standards have to be taught to students. When that was mandated by the state, the school district of Waukesha said, we're going to place those standards into the economics course. And that's why economics has been a required course, because we are, by state statute, required to teach that financial literacy, which again is the personal finance standards. We are suggesting, instead of requiring economics, we would require 1 semester of personal finance, which would meet the state statute of the financial literacy, which they don't call it financial literacy. I don't know why. I didn't write that policy in the past, but it's called personal finance standards in state statute.
And just so the committee knows, this policy language around our graduation requirements was carried forward from our former policy manual prior to Neola. into what we did in our drafting in Neola. We didn't mess around with any of the graduation requirements. So, Dr. Piasek, some of the language that you see in there could have been on the books for quite some time, even
Yes.
prior to current reviews.
Okay. Just one other question. How much is the grant?
So it's upwards of $30,000, and it depends on your district size. We're anticipating 30,000.
Per year? Mm-hmm. And that's to offer personal financial planning?
It encompasses quite a bit. So it encompasses our ability to purchase resources to support the curriculum. We can use it for staffing, curricular, when we pay teachers to come in and support curricular writing. It supports financial experiences. So we do in our, I don't know if you remember, but our teaching and learning team presented a field trip that they do every year where they take students to experience some like real life financial planning. So it can be used for that. It encompasses quite a bit that it can be used for.
What was the amount?
30,000.
Okay.
The condition of getting it is that you have to teach?
You have to
Require?
require personal finance
And that, so is it 30,000 per high school, or is it for the entire
for
district?
the entire district.
Okay.
Did you say every year?
Correct.
Every year.
Every year?
Other questions that you have for Rachel? Anthony?
So, trying to understand, the financial literacy requirement has been there for some time, and that was infused into the economics course. That's how we met that requirement. So, by pulling that supposedly out of economics and making it its own course, economics would be kind of a skeleton. The content would be a little light.
So the personal finance requirements that we are required to teach don't encompass, it's not a full year, it's not even really, I would say, a semester. It's a few standards that are required that you are to teach. And so we've had a personal finance class on our books for quite some time. So it doesn't encompass currently their whole economics class. And so, again, the econ teacher who was here at the TNL meeting spoke to maybe a few weeks, not necessarily, right, their whole semester. So it's not like they're going to be left with, what are we doing now for 12 weeks of our unit? And so our personal finance class would take those few standards that the state requires and ensure that they're infusing them in addition to all of the other standards around personal finance, and really ensure again that the class is robust. And
So I guess my perspective then is, if we've infused financial literacy all these years into economics to meet a standard, why couldn't we, in the same vein, infuse economics, if you want to call it that, with some of the offerings we're trying to accomplish in world history so that we meet that literacy standard, and run a course like economics alongside world history? And my point being, if all we're trying to do is to meet some standards, get some grants, that's great, but we're losing something unique in economics to say that we're only going to view that through the lens of world history. Well, you know, we're going to lose something. The other part of this is I wonder, and I don't know, how will the AP economics portion last without, I would assume that many students are not going to probably go to AP economics if they haven't had the offering.
so two things that I want, so first off, most of our students don't take economics and AP economics. They take one or the other. So they don't start with one and then move to the other. We are exploring, some other districts do break up. Currently, what we offer is AP Economics as one course. We have districts in our surrounding area that offer AP Microeconomics and AP Macroeconomics. They are two separate tests, and so we are exploring the potential of doing that for our students, because there is some feedback that it is a lot in one AP course. And so we are exploring what that might look like for our students to divide the course right now, but our students currently don't take economics and then hop into AP Economics. That's a rare occasion. What I do want to address, though, is your comment about taking economics and like putting it into world history. So I'm going to screen share one thing. It's not a whole presentation, so I promise.
This is the first presentation at a policy committee in 8 years.
It's not a presentation. And it's going to be in your handout that I give you, but I want to just show it. So I think that the misconception as we continue to discuss this is this idea that world history, A, is the only course impacted by this change, and that B, this idea that like economics being infused into our courses is a new concept. So I referenced at our teaching and learning meeting, and I'm going to make this bigger. I referenced one of our veteran teachers, Mr. Rux. He has been a teacher at Waukesha West for many years. He and his colleagues took U.S. history. He also teaches AP U.S. history, and what you'll see when you look at, again, the AP U.S. history curriculum is economics is already embedded within the AP curriculum. They don't have to change a thing. So what he did is took all of the economics standards, so choices and decision-making, incentives, supply, demand, and competition, and he looked at what is in his current curriculum. What are the current units of study that he teaches for the entire year? And he listed all of the areas in which those economic standards already connect. So economics isn't just being woven into world history, it is being woven in and connected to human geography, to world history, and to U.S. history. What we haven't done, because this is where we're at in the curricular revision process, is keep in mind the new standards, right? These are new standards that are demanding this integration. We have not, right? This is our first time working with these new standards. Our curricular revision process has historically looked like we unpack our standards. We, for the first time in my time in Waukesha, have decided we're going to stop home growing our curriculum and we're going to look to support it with a curricular resource. Once we have that resource and we know our standards, we're now going to build the units of study aligned to those standards. And so that work has not yet started. But we feel really confident as a team, and again, we have a team of veteran as well as some teachers who have been in it, right, 3 to 5 years, who have done this crosswalk of what currently exists and are looking at our pilot resources, which you're going to hear about in May, that have been built, aligned to the new standards that are designed this way, and are feeling incredibly sure of themselves that, like, again, this idea of these economic standards, money, economic fluctuations in business cycles, that they are interconnected in all of those units of study, from human geography to world to U.S. history. And so I want to make it clear that this is not just about like filling a semester of world history with like the economics piece. This is about expanding world history and connecting economics through all of those core requirements. And I hope this visual helped with that. Maybe it didn't.
Let me ask you,
Joe's going to give me a
I
hard
want to
time.
make sure I got something
putting it
clear
up.
from what you're saying. I want to see if we got something clear from that.
Yeah, please.
If you looked at the economics a year ago, and you outlined it, like apparently was done here, you would have come up with X number of things that are in the economics, that economics course. Are you saying all of those items will reappear someplace in the history courses you're talking about? We're not taking any of the pieces of economics and throwing them away. They're reappearing in a place where they might make sense, rather than just be in economics.
Correct. And
All of a sudden, it reminds me of the way we have now integrated mathematics, so it's not isolated into 5 pillars.
it's a perfect example, Bill, and I think what I would say is that's a perfect comparison. I'm sorry, Mr. Baumgart. And what I would add is, if you think about that as a comparison to our math and our math pathways, right? What we're developing with math, if you remember that presentation, is when students, after they hit Math 3, our goal is that they have an idea, right, their junior year, like, I'm into this. So now I'm like super college bound. I know what my colleges need. I'm going to take Calc BC. Or I'm really into the STEM field, so I might be looking at industrial math, or I might be looking at, right, so we're developing these pathways. Economics and AP economics, to your point, Mr. Genovia, are still on the books. So for our students who, after U.S. history, that have gotten this taste of economics all throughout their programming in our required courses, still have the complete option to say, I want to do an even deeper dive into economics. That's a robust course, right? They're not, I think Kelly, Dr. Piasek, you mentioned it in one of our last meetings. Those teachers are not just, right, standing up there teaching about an economic principle and not connecting it to something deeper and larger and meaningful. And so our students will still most certainly have the opportunity to say, I want to continue to take that. But as a district, what we had to weigh was, what do we place a higher value on? Do we place a higher value on the personal finance being that requirement, knowing that the economics standards, we can get them those standards in those required classes, and if they want more, they want that extra dive, it's there for them. But we're going to require the financial planning. We're going to require the life skills that come out of the financial planning. When we look at our student body, when we look at the feedback that our students gave us, that we've heard from parents, a number of parent emails I have received saying, thank you, my child needs this, thank you. Like, my child still doesn't know what, again, to Molly's point earlier, a credit card is. Those are not skills they're learning in the economics course. And so I think those are the conversations we have to weigh. And ultimately, it then does come down to, how many credits are we requiring? Because again, we can say, let's require it all, but it's at the expense of students choosing their pathways and what is of interest to them and their field and their pathway when they leave us.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say one more thing, sorry. You're like, Rachel, stop talking.
Oh, please do.
Our teachers across the board have like grappled with this decision at length. And one of the things I will just say, and it's my own lived experience, but I know our teachers, when I shared the story with them, they all like looked at me like, duh, Rachel, like, we know this, is when you require students to be in a class that they don't want to be in, that is a really difficult sell. And so especially at the high school level, when we start to talk again about required classes, again, we really have to be thinking about, like, what is the value add for that student? Because you're talking about, for economics, a senior level class, a senior level requirement, and at what is the alternative that they could be doing. And again, we want them academically enriched, motivated. We want them in school. My social studies teachers would tell you, heck yeah, require all 4. But when it comes down to requiring students to be somewhere that they don't want to be, there is something to be said about what we see in those classes.
Just one other comment.
Yeah.
The you referenced the standards that we're trying to meet. I guess I would have to see what those standards are exactly, because I think if we're trying to meet a standard that may be misguided in some sense, not that we don't have to, but my point is, we're losing something unique in the realm of social studies with economics. I understand it's infused, all the social studies are. You really can't separate any of them. But when you take a topic like economics and only look at it through history, you're losing all those core concepts like you would in personal finance of just basically how things work in economic models. You don't necessarily get that in history, my opinion, but I guess that is my concern. My fear is that we're going to lose something that's would be very valuable to students that they're not going to get, required or not, elsewhere. So I would have to see the standards that we're trying to meet and understand that better, I guess, for me personally. So thank you.
And I would reference just, and I can share this with you again, I think the teachers I can get you all of the economic standards. I can include those too. I'm going to make a note. But then I think in our teaching and learning presentation, the teachers did a great job of sharing, like, here's, and again, I know I'm going to hear about this tomorrow, but here is like the exact economics standard. So, right, here's the econ standard. Analyze how the allocation of resources can impact the distribution of wealth and income equality or inequality. And then what the teachers did during that teaching and learning meeting was really go into detail as to how they address that standard within that unit of study. So I can get you some more information on that, because that's really their wheelhouse of what that looks like then in action. And then if I may say one other piece, because I do hear us talking a lot about the content of economic standards. And I think the other storyline that we continued to come back to as a team was this, and that was our student achievement data specific to literacy. And while I, again, most certainly don't disagree that the content around what students learn specific to the econ principles is important, our students' literacy scores are urgent. It is urgent and important that these skills are addressed now. And so when I look at when a student is taking economics in our system, it is their senior year. And we spent a lot of time as a team really talking about that 10th grade world history course and the development of the literacy skills. And I know that unless you're sitting in one of our social studies room, it might be hard to envision this, but that our ability to introduce students to complex text, to introduce them to the ability to argue, to introduce their ability to write every single day, that doesn't happen across all of our content areas. And we're working toward it. And in some content areas, we don't expect it, right? I don't expect in PE that students are writing every day. That's not the expectation. But when we talk about we want to change the dial on student achievement, we have lots of work to do K-12, but we can't say that it's too late by the time they get to 10th grade. Like, it is never too late to start to work on fixing our literacy gaps. And so I think that this is also a really big piece to us that, again, I most certainly value the economic principles that might be, right, like we have to attend to, but I value this right now as being incredibly urgent and important. We've heard about it at board meetings, public comments. Our teachers are incredibly frustrated by this data, and so I think that this is also a big piece. They won't be able to access that tier, we call it tier 3 vocabulary, which is what you find in courses like economics, right? That is really hard to access when you are reading far below grade level.
I appreciate that comment. I very much agree that this is the academic focus going forward across the board, every grade level. So I appreciate that. I'm still concerned that we will lose something unique that we can't get back in history.
Yep.
Or anywhere. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
You have something?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to see if Mr. Dietz wanted to speak, because I already had a turn.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to get back to the graduation requirements too, because I think that's, and I just wanted to clarify procedure, just so we're all transparent. Like, the integrated math we approved at TNL, and then we brought to the board, and then it came to policy, or eventually came to policy. Are we approving this in policy, or are we approving it in TNL?
It would, this is coming forward just given the timing of the end of the year. So we're not trying to approve the course sequence in policy.
Okay.
We're trying to give you some perspective on the course
Right.
sequence in policy, so that you had some background, because we go policy, our next meeting then is the teaching and learning meeting in April. And then we start to get up into, and I think you mentioned, like, resource selection, textbook acquisition.
So come
Whatever it might
to April TNL as an action, then to the full board as an action, and then back here to policy in April?
So correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't around when the integrated math sequence was approved, but I believe that policy approves the changes in the graduation requirements.
Right.
Teaching and learning approves the syllabus and UBD work. So teaching and learning never approved the changes to the integrated math in this policy. They approved the course sequence that was done for math. And again, I wasn't there for that work,
Right.
but I believe that was the teaching and learning committee. That's not the policy
Yes.
committee. And then teaching and learning approves the syllabus, the UBDs that you saw. Policy approves the changes to the actual graduation requirements. And so two things that Joe referenced that I would piggyback on. So one is, we want to bring the resource that we want to seek to adopt at the May board meeting. If this recommendation that we would put forward of making world history a year-long course is not, this committee votes no, we're not in favor of changing the graduation requirements, that will change what we bring forward as a resource recommendation, because as we talked about in TNL, world history, we do not have a resource that is built for a semester course. So if world history remains a semester course, that will change what we bring to you in May, because we wouldn't have a resource then. We would continue on with home growing our curriculum for world history. It would be, my opinion, fiscally irresponsible to purchase a year-long resource that we would only be using for a semester-long course.
So one of the things, just so for some perspective, one of the reasons why we're bringing the graduation policy is certainly to talk about what this would do to the social studies selection. The other reason is, as we add more required classes, and we then begin to limit student choice, what do we want to do in the scope of graduation credits as a whole? What do we want to do from a requirement standpoint? And that's the policy-driven component of this. We're not trying to get the cart out before the horse and, try to get you to approve the policy before the course sequence is approved in TNL. But the two kind of go hand in hand. And a few examples of that, a few years back, we implemented, we talked about science credits, and the science credits, then the sequence was updated to like biology, chemistry, physics being the courses that everybody takes. And then we talked about the math in curriculum and teaching and learning, and then we came forward and we updated the math sequence here. There's a segment in this policy that talks about taking one of the high school credits must be taken virtually or through a computer-based platform. And as we add more of the requirements, we start, I can't speak for what your high school experience was, so I'll only speak for mine. Junior and senior year, there was some perk to junior and senior year because you had about half of your schedule to pick the courses that you wanted. So if you were inclined to, enjoy social studies, you could take more social studies classes. If you were inclined to want to take more shop classes, you could take more shop classes. As we begin to fill that schedule up, we begin to limit then what kids are actually able to choose along the way. And there's then an impact then on obviously engagement, and we see that through our F data, we see that through our graduation rate, we see that through the enrollment and the need for programs over at East, our alternative programs. So you start to see an increased need in things that remediate a lack of engagement. Because the kids at East are brilliant kids, they're not motivated to do the school piece. And so as we add more, I think we need to be very careful with what we're taking off the table at that time, which is the reason why it pairs nicely with this econ discussion, not that it's the driver of it, but it's something that we need to talk about. And so for some perspective, I have some numbers for you tonight, because we're not acting on anything, but just for informational purposes, I have about 15 school districts, 16 school districts with graduation requirements that range from 22 for a diploma up to 28 and a half for a diploma. And some of them are neighbors, with like KM being 28, Nicolay High School being 22, Muskego being 23, Arrowhead being 25, the Tosa schools being 23, Oconomowoc being 26, Mugwanago 27, Pewaukee 28, the Madison at 22, Green Bay at 22, Appleton at 23, Cedarburg at 24, Mequon-Thiensville 24, Elmbrook 24, Eau Claire 23 and a half, and Oshkosh 23 and a half. And so just by presenting you that range, I just want to give you some perspective on, we're proposing, I believe this gets us to, this current proposal gets us to 20, would be 25 or 25 and a half.
The current proposal, Joe, maintains status.
The proposal does, but I think that some of the discussion was, do we add both?
Right.
And
Correct.
that was, do we have both? And now you're going to 25 and a half, possibly 26, just given how long the course would be.
Correct.
And so that's where it's, what do we do? And are there other credits that are required on here, or other courses that are required on here that we don't place as much value on? And so again, that's the reason why, from a credit standpoint, it's one of the challenges that we have with a committee model, where we have a teaching and learning committee that's going to debate the how and the what and all of that, but it's this committee that says, how do we say what's required or what's not required in the end for graduation? And so the reason why we wanted to have the discussion tonight.
I'd like to respond to that if I could, because I have a bunch of questions, and you could have saved me a lot of work, because I went and found all those numbers by myself. But, I started by just looking at who's doing the best around us on the forward exam, and how does that track to how many credits they're requiring. And there's no consistency, right? There's, some are 28, some are 24. Based on the numbers you read and from what I saw, we're right in the middle at 25. We're consistent with schools that perform really well. Unfortunately, when it comes to Waukesha County and the forward exam, we're not performing very well. I have, maybe for other discussion, which is why I'd like to focus more on literacy if we could another time, but I'm very concerned that we're trying to address some of the literacy challenges when we get to 9th and 10th grade, 11th grade. I think literacy needs to be addressed in middle school, and I don't think the model that we have right now is working, but that's a different conversation. I am not proposing the 4 credit social studies. I threw it out there as, we haven't talked about this. We haven't talked about the trade-offs of 4 versus 3. And when I went and looked at this whole list of schools and tried to look at, the state standard is 3, or the state requirement is 3. If I look at schools around us, most of them require 3 credits of social studies. We, Pewaukee, and Kettle Moraine have 3.5. They are performing much better than us in many ways. There's lots of explanations for that. I went and looked at what they include in that, and I will tell you, Hamilton, that's on the top of the list, and Cedarburg was one that you mentioned, does have economics as a requirement. So how do they get 3 credits of social studies and include that economics requirement? The difference is, of all the schools that I've looked at, nobody is requiring human geography for a year. And we are. So I don't know why that's not part of the conversation. We are requiring a year of human geography for every student. we're offering AP. A lot of the other schools offer AP Human Geography, and they offer it as an alternative, in many cases, to world history. So you take a year of US, a year of world, or AP Human Geography, and then you're taking civics and econ, or government and econ. So I appreciate where we're trying to go here. I actually understand the value of a year of world history. I think it's important that kids know about the world. I think as a physicist/engineer, I can tell you the way the world works is through economics, not through physics, right? I've learned more about how the world works through economics than I have through physics. And so I don't think it adds value if we try to pretend that we're not teaching kids economics by bleeding it into everything else that they're doing. I think it's really important that those concepts are front and center, and I've made my opinion very clear, but I'm not trying to, I guess I am debating a little bit. I don't want to just put up a wall. I want to look at what are the trade-offs that we need to consider to maintain a reasonable set of requirements in a way that we can do the personal financial planning with, which I think absolutely should be a requirement for all of our students. And I think we should raise it up a level, the point where we're helping them really experience, what's coming in their future. But I think before we talk about just chopping off economics, I think we have to talk about the other thing that we're not talking about, which is this required year of human geography. And also whether we could put something into middle school. For example, I know one of the, I think it's New Berlin actually, that allows their 8th graders to fulfill their health credit in middle school. We don't. So what else could we do? And having had a few 8th graders here, I don't know that their time is well spent in 7th and 8th grade. And I think it's fantastic when 8th graders can focus on a class that looks and feels like a high school class and get a letter grade and bring that credit forward. I think they're capable when they're 14. So I'd like to talk more about that. I know that there's a time pressure to get some of these things moved forward, but I just haven't been convinced that this is the only way to go about this. And while we're one of the few that requires economics, I actually think we're one of the few that got this right. And I think before we give up on that, we really need to talk about what that means for us and for our students.
So similar to Joe, I wish you would have called me because I also could have given you this beautiful sheet, Kelly, that has all of the things that you just requested. Thank you. Yeah. So Joe's going to give it to you. So what we did as a team, I just want to respond, is we did an analysis exactly like you're talking about. So we looked at, you can see all of the comparable districts. We looked at what are their social studies requirements within those systems. What are they offering? What results are they leveraging? I think when we talk about results that they're leveraging, that's a really tricky conversation because there's a lot of variables that some of our surrounding districts, especially when we talk about Waukesha County, there's a lot of variables there that we're not comparing apples to apples. And so when we did this as a teacher team, and this was part of our, what we call our root cause analysis, this was one of our data points, this was, again, a pretty tough conversation because, again, one of the things that we do as a teacher team is where is this working? So, Kelly, you mentioned right forward exam scores. We also looked at ACT scores and MAP scores. And so when we say where is this working, let's find the places where it's working. So you can see we identified some pretty high-performing school districts. And then we identified, you can see, what is their current social studies sequence look like? Like I said, the problem lies, and then we start to unpack, well, let's look at, again, how many teachers do they have? What's their student class size ratio? How many of their students are students with IEPs? So there's a lot of factors that sometimes look very different in some of our surrounding Waukesha County area schools versus us. With that said, to your point, we did notice that in most of our surrounding districts, in fact, in almost all, AP Human Geography is on the books, regular Human Geography is not offered. And so we had a pretty at length discussion about why is that? And it goes all the way back to some of you who have been board members for quite some time. Remember a system that we adopted in this district quite some time ago called Align by Design. And it was a system in which we had essentially 3 tracks for each of our required courses. We had an AP track, or if we didn't have the AP course, it was called an honors track. We had a mid-level track, and then we had what was called the core track. And we essentially used student data to place students into what level of those courses we thought would best support their academic success. That was eliminated. I'm looking at you, Joe, because it was mine and your first year, I think, in the district when we walked into schools and realized that we are essentially tracking students, and that is not a practice that is supported by best practice in pedagogy, all of that. But that was really where the AP Human Geography came into play, and regular human geography. With that said, in conversations, Dr. Piaczyk, around do we want to continue to maintain that offering, or do we look at moving world history for a year, U.S. history down, right, and play around with that? One of the conversations continued to be around our overall sequence. The AP College Board continues to recommend world history, AP world history, and AP US history where we have them placed. So they recommend that as a sophomore level class and a junior level class. So again, we typically follow AP College Board's recommendation. AP Human Geography is recommended at the freshman level. AP College Board, so we're aligned there. And so when we look at then placing our courses in other locations, we start to have some conversation about that alignment then to our AP and our teachers' ability to collaborate with one another. That came up as part of that conversation. And then we had a pretty big deep dive into what students are doing in their human geography class, the rigor within that class, and again, I'll go back to the literacy skills that they're developing within that class that we know they are not coming to us with when they leave us from middle school. Kelly, you mentioned middle school as being where we need to tackle. Again, we are tackling curricular revisions in both ELA and social studies right now at the mid-level. I would argue, and I think you would agree, this literacy is a K-12 issue, right? It needs to start in elementary. It's not just middle school. And so that was really the rationale for why we didn't agree with removing human geography, but it was a conversation that as an entire social studies team, we did have. And again, it really came down to looking at recommendations from AP, looking at, again, our root cause analysis, and looking at what the course entails. But to your point, just like we're very unique in that we require economics, but to your point, right, like you think we got it right, our team felt we are very unique in that we offer regular human geography, but they think we got it right in that what students are doing in that course and what students are learning in that course, they feel is incredibly beneficial. So I just want to respond that our team did do that same analysis that you did and had that discussion.
So from a policy committee standpoint, a lot of what was just discussed will carry over to the teaching and learning committee. But I did think it was worthwhile to have this in front of you here from a policy standpoint because it does, it pushes up against other discussions around how many credits do we want to require, and is there anything in here that we need to revise from a committee standpoint? So is there anything that you see in the future based off of our discussion tonight, based off of your observations at TNL, that we would need to discuss from a policy standpoint as we go forward? So if there's any questions on that part, or if there's anything left for Rachel, feel free to ask. But again, we wanted to bring it forward for information discussion tonight.
Greg?
Mr. Herman, could you tell me the projected implementation of the change with personal finance and economics? That's not next school year. That would be the following school year if that recommendation indeed goes through.
Correct. It would be beginning in the 23-24 school year.
Yes.
What grades would that apply to then? Because would that be incoming freshmen?
Correct. So similar to how we rolled out math, we would have kind of the phased approach for our incoming freshmen, and then, yes, we would phase it in based on our
Okay.
students. Yep.
Okay, Rachel, go
One more
ahead.
thing. Do you know how many kids take personal financial planning right now? Do you know what percentage of our students?
Can you give me 10 seconds?
You can
and I'll
tell me
pull it
later,
up?
it's fine.
Okay.
I'm just
What's the
curious
question,
about that.
please?
How many students are currently taking personal financial planning as an elective?
She's going to check.
I can have it for you, and can I email it to you?
Yeah, I
have
would
it
just
up
be
here,
curious to
But
know.
it would take me 10 seconds to add up the 3 numbers. Thanks.
Just one more.
So if we, well, it just kind of depends on how the decision goes, right? If the change you're proposing is not approved, would you propose the 4-credit alternative?
I think
Where-
that would have to be a discussion with the teaching and learning team, and then probably our teaching and learning school team as well.
Have you guys thought through, like, alternative scenarios? Like, you know,
Yeah,
two
so,
of 3 required electives, or, you know, how there's other ways to make sure there's more access to classes like econ?
can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Are there just other scenarios that,
So the alternate scenario, and again, when I say the social studies department would be ecstatic over a 4-credit requirement. So I want to be clear that requiring 4 credits, the social studies teachers are all on board. Because, right, like, they love their content area, they value the work that they're doing in those classes. And so, again, it comes back to if what's on the table is requiring 4 credits of social studies, in addition to a requirement of personal finance, that would not be our alternative recommendation because of what Joe has referenced, and that I don't think that right now we would be in favor of raising the total credit allocation.
it would stay the same?
So instead, our alternative, but I would need to take this back to my social studies team and the teaching and learning team, would most likely look like we would perhaps require 4 credits in social studies, moving world history to a year, maintaining the economics as a required course, and not requiring personal finance. So personal finance would go, and we would maintain the personal finance standards in that economics course. And again, I have, again, a slide, but, you know, I have advantages, is that, right? We have the 4 credits, economics is there. We achieve our literacy goal of making sure that world history is that semester-long course. The disadvantages are that, again, our team of educators believes that the personal finance standards can best be taught in the personal finance class. The economic standards, again, are already infused, and students who choose to take, to Joe's point earlier, their senior year, when there is more choice and our students are much more independent and, right, like they're going to be in college or career the following year, can choose to take economics. And then we lose the grant dollars by not requiring it. But that right now is the alternative that we would be potentially looking at.
Well, the personal finance program is, I know it's required with quotation marks by the state, or will be.
The personal
And it's
finance,
also very popular with parents these days.
correct.
I think
And
we
there
have to
is-
remember that aspect, too.
Yep, and our students, again, we surveyed students, yes. There is, and I mentioned this at TNL, we are still, again, monitoring the bill that's currently in the state. The bill that's on the table is for 1 credit of personal finance to be required. So, again, we don't know how fast, how slow that's going to move through, but again, when we talk about overall credit implications, if we maintain that econ is required and that were to then go through, now you're talking about an additional credit that's on the table for required personal finance instruction.
And plain logic would tell you that's important. Personal finance.
Well, there's, I believe, 12.
Well, having
Well, of
gone to the
course,
personal financial literacy program for the last 10 or 15 years and watching the way the kids come in and the way they go out of that,
Yep,
they need personal finance.
yep.
So anyway, that's my little piece of the change,
A
so.
lot of schools already require it.
Hmm?
A lot of districts already require it. They have it built in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
most
and it-
districts most districts, when this state statute was passed, most districts required personal finance. And so, again, Dr. Piasek referenced Waukesha is pretty unique in its requirement of economics. Most districts put those personal finance standards into their personal finance class and
Right.
made the class a requirement. Waukesha put them in economics and made economics the requirement.
Okay. Thank you for being here, sharing this with us.
For getting me out before.
And,
Appreciate that. Just for a timeline then, so we will talk, I was anticipating to come back in April to this policy meeting to potentially look at
19th.
a revision to this policy, so.
We'll see you in March of 2030 for the next presentation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will leave these with Julie, if you just want to grab one of each on your way out.
Okay, that was the first of our 16 policies that are under discussion for, well, that really wasn't in the technical revision part of it, because that was just one we wanted to talk about. Seriously, this is a lot of these are, next ones we're going to be talking about are quite simply technical adjustments, one time, one meeting, and that's it.
Correct. We just bring this to your attention. So, Mr. Baumgart, if I may, I can just go through policy by policy.
You may do that. And if
Stop.
we have one that we want to stop, we can stop you.
Please, yes, interrupt me. Policy 5111.02, Educational Opportunity for Military Children. This was simply updated to add the Wisconsin State Statute, the 14.91. That was the only correction to this. The technical revision for 5335, care of students with chronic medical conditions. In it, you'll see on the first page, neuromuscular disorder was added under item F. We did delete a form by Section 504 plan. We do have we have another form that we use to follow up on 504s. We also do add in individual health plan is spelled out under letter B on the bottom of page 1, and then it's capitalized there as a formal name, and it is then built into the rest of the policy as IHP. And then they do add under item D on page 2, under health management activities, epinephrine auto-injectors or EpiPens. So those, again, are just technical corrections, additions that we bring to your attention. Under 5420, reporting student progress, item D is the correction, or the addition where it just says as intervals determined by the board. So our grade reporting to families comes at the quarter, trimester, semester basis for families.
I had a question about
Yes.
that, Joe. Where is that documented? This is intervals determined by the board. Do we have a separate document somewhere that says what intervals we've determined?
We do not. I do believe it's just been based off of past accepted practice when grades are reported to parents. So if there was a need, we certainly could build that in by level at a future meeting. So for instance, like at the high school semester, end of the year grades, at the elementary, at the end of each trimester. I believe at the middle school, grades are formally declared at the end of the year, if I'm remembering our practice right.
So I'm just curious if the policy says that the board is determining the intervals, but the board doesn't,
The board,
do we have documented somewhere board-determined intervals?
I would have to look up if we had that. But again, certainly something that could be added in the future if the board wanted to do so. 5513, the care of district property. If you look under the fourth paragraph, just talking about the damage, it adds or facilities, and then how those go about getting addressed on policy 6152, student fees, fines, and charges. The technical revision to investigations involving suspected child abuse. It does add in a segment, and this is statutorily required, where it's in some instances, such investigations may involve allegations against the student's parents. So caretaker was changed to parents, and the investigating agency may instruct administration not to contact the parents unless they are authorized to do so by the investigating agency. The administration shall cooperate with such request. So this is a legal requirement of us to not get in the way of a criminal investigation, particularly around child abuse in this situation. We do have a couple of updates to the seclusion restraint. We did go through this as a committee at the last, so we talk about all employees and covered individuals, so employee was added on the first page. The addition of physical restraint was added in the first paragraph. The duration of the seclusion is only as long as necessary to resolve the clear, present, and imminent risk to the physical safety of the student or others, so there's clarification around that. The covered individuals may only use physical restraint on or with a student if all of the following apply, and then it goes through the defined areas under Wisconsin State Statute 11831. So,
I have a clarifying question on that one. I'm struggling with the difference then between a technical revision and the policies that we just looked at that had some pretty minor, like statute updates. Changing a shall to a may seems like it's substantive.
Unless it goes in line with what the statute is requiring us to do. So if the statute says something, and again, we can certainly pull this out and have the committee take care of it, but the language that you have in front of you is in line with the state statute and the DPI expectations around this. Going further than that could limit an administrator's ability to intervene, but what you see is what is required of us in that area.
We had a pretty extensive conversation about this, and I remember that was some of the language that we were
We debated and talked
talking a lot
about.
about. So how does it go back on a technical revision?
How does it go back to?
How does it revert back
You just asked that it be,
just as a technical revision? I mean, how is that just a technical revision?
I mean, the may to the,
Yeah. There's,
the only? No, we can
certainly pull this and
We can
discuss
pull it as, and make it a discussion item, and
I feel like we already discussed it at length back in May of last year. I don't know what the, in practice, what the difference is. But I think it comes back to, we had a lot of conversation to change it, and then we went back and changed it back. And I don't see, like, statute changes, so I don't know why.
well, if it previously was shall only use seclusion, and now it says we may use seclusion, so it wouldn't, there's no requirement that you do use seclusion, the way I read it.
I would be happy to
I'd like to talk more about this one.
Pull that one out?
pull this out, bring it back next month. Yep, happy
Okay,
to do that.
Julie, got that recorded? Thank you. Which one was that?
That was 5630.01. The next policy, 6114, cost principles and spending. This was updated on the last page. It changes Wisconsin Department of Education to Public Instruction, and that was a drafting error that was in there that we made through committee the last time we entertained this. Debt management, there's a grammatical correction. So under item D, preserve access to financial markets is the technical correction on this policy. On 6151, returned checks, the policy has been retitled to reflect the content of the policy. So instead of bad checks, they would be return checks. Budget preparation just outlines that we will be preparing and presenting our budget in alignment with the DPI and any applicable law and regulations. There's a legal citation added to 7300 disposal of real estate. Then there is a legal
Statute.
citation added to the disposition of personal property. And then this policy 7430, safety standards. The Department of Safety and Professional Services, so removal of unnecessary language regarding requirements.
Does that mean that that material is elsewhere?
I believe it's covered under
Oh, right.
that other, in the event an inspection is made by a representative of the state, the
Okay.
superintendent shall report. Under student records, there's an outdated form that has been removed, an outdated terminology. So, for instance, this is a relatively long policy. We add in there district assigned email addresses, if available, as part of releasing the names, addresses, and email addresses of students as part of the record component. And then the board authorizes the use of computer data storage instead of microfilm process or electromagnetic processes of reproduction. Yes?
Gone.
This was the one I emailed you about. I don't see any reference to a form in this policy, and I'm wondering if that was actually intended to point to, I think it was 5335 that had
No,
a,
actually, Kelly, you're right.
okay,
The executive summary is wrong.
okay,
We actually removed that form earlier.
okay.
The earlier revision. So, yeah,
'Cause-
you're right, there is no reference to it.
Okay, because there was another policy that actually had reference to a form. It was,
A few policies ago,
yeah, I seem to recall, it was 5335 where it had Form 2260.
Yep.
For the 504 plan. And so that did not say removal of form, so I'm just wondering if it was, so it sounds like it was an error with the
So
cover sheet. Okay,
this, yeah, goes away.
thank you.
Then under policy 9800.01, veterans as classroom volunteers, the board shall, concurrent with the Department of Veterans Affairs presentation, award a certificate of achievement and appreciation to any military veteran. So we're just aligning ourselves to what Veteran Affairs requires. And that
That's
is
the last
end
one.
of our list of technical corrections. We will have the seclusion restraint discussion prepared for next month.
Okay, recommendations for future committee meetings. What have you got coming at us, Joe?
We continue to administratively review the proposed policy updates for this next bundle of policies. So we will be coming forward with some business, some HR, and then some board-level policies that I'll meet with Dr. Siebert and Mr. Como on to come forward to the committee.
Okay. Any other requests from anybody for recommendations? We'll keep you busy. With that, we are adjourned. We did not go 5 hours.